Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we move on now to our third plenary of the day, and we will in fact be picking up several of the themes that we just heard about from the World Bank CEO. The plenary title is Efficiency, Connectivity for a Brighter Future, and it is my pleasure now to hand over the stage to the session moderator. He's Baher El-Hifnawi. He is the World Bank's Global Lead for Development Corridors and Regional Integration. So, Baher, the stage is yours. Take it away.
So we'll give a couple of minutes until, okay, we have the panel members are here. This is the last session of the day, so I know you're all eager to leave, so I'm going to speak particularly slowly today. This session, as Melinda has mentioned, the name of it is Efficient Connectivity for a Brighter Future. I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to put it in perspective. We heard about sustainable mobility for all, the four principles, the four goals, if you will, access, universal access, efficiency, safe, green. We're talking about efficiency. Now, efficiency, I'm sure if I would ask anyone here in the room, you've got different views of what efficiency is. And we talk about efficiency in transport, allocative efficiency, operational efficiency, institutional efficiency. So I want to start by actually setting the stage a bit by telling you when we're talking about efficiency, what we have in mind. Johnny, up here, please. So we will be discussing, the session will be focusing today on actually efficiency to cities that come from investments in transport corridors or large investment projects. If we take a corridor that passes certain towns and certain cities, what are the economic efficiency gains that this corridor brings to the cities? And we have to be also cognizant of the fact that when these corridors are there, yes, there will be reduction in transport costs, there will be benefits, but there will also be possibly some negatives. Some towns will be bypassed, some jobs that may disappear. So that takes us to the next step. When we have these billions of investments in corridors, we have to really think about what complementary policies cities and governments should take in order to leverage, to get the best out of this mega investment in the corridors or transport projects. That's what we will talk about today. And the idea is to try to see what lessons we can get when we're talking again about cities and corridors and large transport projects. We're also going to talk about efficiency, technology. We've been talking all day about technology. We see here we're talking about digital. When we're talking about these corridors with the technology, how does that impact transport services? And how do these in turn impact the cities? We're going to hear about corridors in Europe, in Southern Africa, in Western Africa, large projects in Argentina, and try to glean from that some of the experience. Let me take a couple of minutes, and I will ask, please, the panel members to join me up here. And yes, please. And while we do that, since we're starting a couple of minutes late, I will I will start the introduction. We have a distinguished panel. Real pleasure for me to be here moderating this panel. We have Manuela Menendez, who is the Secretary of Works, National Ministry of Transport of Argentina. She is a director also at the Metropolitan Transportation Agency, whose main mission is developing public policies with the city and provincial governments to enhance the mobility in Buenos Aires and its metropolitan area. Again, focus on complementary policies. She also has been part of a team that has implemented a sustainable mobility plan for which she received the Sustainable Transport Award in 2014. Welcome and thank you for being part of the team. We have next to Manuela Solomon Okiri, who's the Department Director and Delegate for Territorial Development in the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Benin. He has 19 years of experience in land use and development. Again, when we think about transport, we have to think about land use and its impact. And for the last 12 years, prior to his current job, he was actually the General Director of the National Observatory of Spatial Analysis of Development. Thank you for being here, Solomon. Then we have Professor Maria Boyle, who's a professor at the Department of Maritime Studies at the University of Piraeus and head of the Unit of Transport and Economics, non-land transport at the Hellenic Institute for Transportation. She has also held teaching positions here at Rutgers University, has recently done a fair bit of research on the transport corridors and their impact on landlocked countries, and actually does some very good work on logistics as well. Next to Maria, we have Professor Chaibao Liu, who is the Dean of the School of Transportation and Logistics at Southwest Jiao Tong University. He's also a senior advisor of Truck Alliance in Chengdu. As you can see, you can imagine his work focuses on interdisciplinary research, encompassing integrated transportation planning and advanced networks, big data. Truck Alliance, which he will talk about, and he's a senior advisor there, as I mentioned, it actually does very interesting work in using Uber for freight, using consolidation, again, the efficiencies that we were talking about. Then we have Indermit Gill, who's the director of the Duke Center for International Development and professor of practice of public policy in the Sanford School of Public Policy. Indermit was formerly the director of development policy and the chief economist here at the World Bank, and has held various positions in the bank before that in East Asia and in Central Asia. Welcome back. And last but not least, Johnny Smith, who actually landed, I'd say, a few hours ago. Johnny is the Chief Executive Officer of the Walvis Bay Corridor Group in Namibia. This is a public-private partnership of transport and logistics stakeholders who looks at how to develop the hinterland of the corridor and take advantage of the large investment in the corridor. He's also the CEO of the Africa Corridor Management Alliance. So we have a very distinguished panel here. Thank you all for being here. Please join me in giving them a welcome. I'm going to start the session by asking Indermit, and I'm going to ask you in your capacity of the lead of the World Development Report on reshaping economic geography that is actually shaping a lot of our thinking today and complementarity policies when dealing with infrastructure. If you can share with us some of the guiding principles that will help get people in the right frame when we're thinking about the role of the infrastructure, the institutions, interventions, and how they all come together.
Do that, but the thing I wanted to ask you, Baher, is it okay if I speak from there?
Please.
Yeah? Okay. So, thank you very, very much for that welcome, Baher, and thank you for giving me the first slot. I'll try not to abuse the time. So it's great to be here with you all. I spent 23 years at the bank, which is a long, long time. So you know, I knew people like Jose Luis when he was nothing. And now he's he is a senior director now. But you know, he's not the reason why I'm here. I'm here because I'm a friend of Baher's, okay? And whenever Baher asks me to do something, I do it. So he asked me to come, as he said, because I was part of the team that wrote the 2009 World Development Report. That was called the slides if you want to. I don't want to show you many slides. I just want to show you some pictures. Okay. 2018 actually is the 10th anniversary of that report, so it's a very auspicious way to start the year for me. So I'll take 5 minutes to tell you 5 things about the WDR, and then I'll show you a couple of slides from China. Right? So the first thing I wanted to tell you is that you should find the report and read it. Okay? At least read. There's a very short summary right at the beginning. It's just 4 or 5 pages. It's a really well-written report, and it's well-written not because I wrote it. It's because I had a fantastic team. At least one member of that team is here. Somik Lal is over here. But it's a superb report, right? I think it's probably quite possibly the best WDR ever written, okay? And I say that with a lot of thought because it actually takes a very obscure subject of economic geography and makes it obvious, right? And that at least according to Leonardo da Vinci, is the definition of genius: how to make the obscure obvious, right? The second thing I want to say is about what we did, right? So basically what we did was we documented the spatial transformations that are necessary for development, right? Just as people had documented the sectoral transformations that were needed for development, we documented the spatial transformations, right? So we knew that as countries grow, they go from agricultural to industrial to service-oriented, and what we did was to actually document the spatial dual of this, okay? And naturally, transport is a big part of that, right? So my third point is that while some of this had been done before, I mean, especially by people like Paul Krugman and others, I think we did it better, right? He actually won the Nobel Prize, but we did it in a way that you can actually understand what we were saying. And we did because, I say that we did it better because of three reasons. One is we made it real simple, right? So all you had to understand were three concepts: density, distance, and division, right? The second thing that we did was that we showed how these dimensions changed with development, and even more importantly, we showed that these transformations could actually be measured. Okay? And the third thing that what we did was, based both on theory and on evidence, we showed that these transformations could actually be speeded up by good policies or slowed down by bad policies, right? And that you actually could think of three sets of instruments. You could think of institutions, which were spatially blind. You could think of infrastructure, which was spatially connective, and you could think of interventions that were spatially targeted, right? And then what we did was we established basically a functional hierarchy between these instruments, and we said that if you really wanted to be efficient, you always would start by improving institutions. After that, you went to connective infrastructure, and then finally, and only if necessary, do you go to targeted interventions, right? So if you reverse the order, you would pay a price, right? And the price would either be that you would be ineffective, or it would be that you would be tremendously inefficient, even if you were effective, okay? So that was my fourth point. And my fifth and last point was that WDR ended up influencing many debates in the European Union, in China, in Russia, and places. But I'm not sure how much it changed things at the bank. And because 10 years is a very short time, so we're going to still keep trying. We have a very dedicated team, so I hope that you do find the time to read that report and then debate it and implement it. Now, all of this seems very theoretical, right? So I'm going to give you one concrete example, and then I'll shut up. So you must have seen these two pictures, right? So the first picture on the left is the picture that you see a lot of. Whenever people talk about Shanghai, they show you that picture there, right? And that is a picture of the modern part of Shanghai, which is the Pudong Financial District, right? And this picture is actually taken from across the Huangpu River, all right? It's actually taken from a part of Shanghai that's called Puxi, right? And pictures of Puxi from the air look like that, right, on the right, okay? So I show this to people, and, you know, I mean, especially people who haven't visited Shanghai, or even those who visited it but who haven't lived in Shanghai, and I ask them, so which one is more impressive? Where would you like to live? And they always say, Pudong. You know, it's gleaming, modern, looks space age, etc. That looks really bad, right? But I have a Chinese friend. His name is Professor James Wen, who teaches at Trinity College in Connecticut, who's a Shanghai native, right? And he actually makes a really good case to the contrary, okay? And his argument is that is basically about density, and it's about efficient connectivity at Bahar, right? So here's what he says. So he goes back in time, and he goes back to a time when Shanghai had actually very different institutions. So between 1945 and 1950, Puxi had private ownership of land. It had no restrictions on land sales and no restrictions on immigrants coming into the city to work and live in the city. So no hukou or anything like that, right? It used property taxes for public finance, and it used a transactions tax when land changed hands. Sounds a lot like what happens here right now, right? Now, and during this time, during 1945 and 1950, the built area of Shanghai remained constant at 86.7 square kilometers, and its population increased from 2.8 million to 4.2 million. Okay? So massive increase in population. It turned out, basically, that Puxi became 50% more dense, right? It went from 32,000 people per square kilometer to 48,000 people, right? Now, fast forward to communist China, where there are no real land markets. Between 2000 and 2010, Pudong had a similar period of growth, right? This part here. The population doubled from 2.4 to 5 million, but with government monopoly rights to buy land from farmers and monopoly rights to supply land to developers, the built area more than tripled. Okay? It went from 102 square kilometers to 360. Show the next slide, please, if you could, right? And the population density basically fell by 40%. Okay? It fell from 2,400 people to 24,000 people per square kilometer to 15,000 people. Okay? So it's a massive drop. Now, Pudong has made enormous investments in infrastructure as it has grown, but its institutions are nearly as good as Puxi's were when it grew as much. Okay? Now, because of what has happened, or because of what happened 50 to 60 years ago, Puxi's spatial structures are actually still more efficient. They're still denser. It's actually a much nicer place to be in. Okay? And they're very efficient, right? They create 21,500 jobs per square kilometer compared to 6,500 jobs in Pudong. Okay? So turns out actually that old Puxi is actually far more inclusive as well. So only 2 million folks from outside of Shanghai live in Pudong compared to 7 million or so in Puxi and other areas. Okay? So it's like far more inclusive as well. So you have to now go back to those same landscapes that I showed you and say, which is a picture of more efficient connectivity? And basically, the whole reason why I just wanted to illustrate this was to tell you that there's that hierarchy that you go from institutions to infrastructure to interventions. And if you reverse that, you end up with gross amounts of inefficiency. Okay?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Indermit. Again, the focus is clearly on the complementary measures on the institutions in this case and the impact. We have infrastructure, but if we don't have the right land markets, then we're not going to go very far. I'm going to ask now, with this in mind, thinking in terms, again, of particular projects and corridors, I'm going to go to Manuela right here. And there, basically, she's thinking about a project in Argentina, railway, a regional railway project that has a lot of these impacts and has a lot of these dimensions, and with some of the complementary policies that we'll get to later. So with that, I'll just ask you to share, give a brief description of that.
Okay, thank you. Yes, listening about what happened here in Shanghai, we all have when we are in public policy, to see how we make people to travel in a better way, how to gain competitiveness in our cities and in our metropolitan areas. In our case, in Argentina, especially in the Buenos Aires metropolitan area, where more than 15 million people live, what we are planning to do and we want to do is to use the existing infrastructure that we have and make it more competitive. We need to make people to be able to move in a better way, to go to work, to go to study or for leisure. But what I think that the point in Argentina is that we have been investing a lot more than 100 years ago in our railway system, but that railway system is a system that has been left behind. There haven't been enough investments after those first investments at the end of the 19th century. And now we need to see where people live, how do they travel, and also thanks to more technology and big information, big data that we have with our infrastructure and our transportation systems, we are able to see where we should go in our city. So that's why having more than 800 kilometers of railway system in the city that doesn't connect, so we have people that if they want to go from the south to the north of the metropolitan area, they have to take a train, then they have to take the metro or a bus and take another railway line. We are planning to develop a connection between these lines, that is the Railway Express network that will be in the heart of the Buenos Aires city and will be able to connect more than 1 million people every day, that will be able to move from the north to the south or from the west to the north without needing to change the mode they use. So they will be able to go through one railway system. And the most important thing is how that measures can help to improve the workforce. People will be able to choose where they want to work, and maybe they could work in a place that if they have to do it right now is more than 2 hours to go to one place to another one. But with this project, they will be able to do it in less than 1 hour. So we think that the impact of the workforce frontier in this area will be very important, and that will help to gain competitiveness, not only in the city of Buenos Aires, that is the heart of this metropolitan area, but also around more than 40 municipalities that are around this city. And this investment is part of trying to use what we already have. We have to be able to see that Argentina has done a very important investment more than 100 years ago, and it's our most important challenge to be able to refresh that infrastructure, to make it more modern, but also to see other things that have to be done to be able to use it in a better way. And once we are able to have these works done in hopefully 6 years from now, we will be able to have 3 times the people that are using the railway system, changing the way that people move, changing the way how people decide to choose their work, to choose where they study, to choose where they live. So I think that this will completely change the approach of where of the decisions that the people will make in the future in the Buenos Aires metropolitan area, and it will have a huge impact in the economy and in the institutions around this area.
Thank you very much, Manuela. I'm going to come back to you later, but one of the questions that I would like you also to talk a little bit about when we get to is, in addition to the infrastructure, what are the complementary policies, again, that you're looking at or considering or would be considering in order to leverage this large investment in the railways? Let me now pass it on to Solomon Okiri. Solomon, one of the big investments in Western Africa is the Abidjan-Lagos Transport Corridor that goes through Benin. So if you would just take a few minutes to introduce the project and how what impact it had, perhaps both positive and negative, on the development of the city of Cotonou.
Okay. Merci. Mesdames, Messieurs, bonsoir.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Je voudrais
I want
tout d'abord, avant de répondre à votre question,
before I
Monsieur Bahet,
answer your question, Mr. Baher,
revenir sur
I want to come
les
back
propos du professeur tout à
to
l'heure.
what the professor was
Je
saying a
voudrais
while
confirmer,
ago.
en tout cas
I
pour ma
want to
part, que le
confirm on
rapport
our part
2009
that
de la
the
Banque mondiale est l'un
report,
des meilleurs.
2009 report
je
of the
l'ai
World Bank is
sur
one of
mon
the
bureau.
best.
Je
I
l'ai
must
lu
say,
encore,
I've
je l'ai
read
relu
this
plusieurs fois.
report
Pourquoi?
several
Parce
times.
qu'il nous
Why?
permet
Because it
de ne pas
allows
voir
us
l'infrastructure.
not
C'est pourquoi
only to
quand
look at
je dois parler du
infrastructure,
corridor,
because I have to talk
je ne vous
about the
parlerai pas
corridor,
d'un
but I'm
trait
not
d'une
going
route.
to talk
Loin
about
de là, je vous
a
parlerai d'un
road.
espace.
I'm going to
Parce
talk
qu'il y a une
of the
interaction
space because
entre la
there's
route et son
interaction
milieu.
between
Et
the
quand vous
road and
parlerez
its
de l'espace,
environment.
c'est pour vous
And
dire
when
quoi?
you
Le
talk
corridor
of
dont
the
je parle,
space,
c'est 5
well,
pays.
it's the corridor
5 pays,
is made
1000
up of
kilomètres qui
5
traversent 5 pays
countries, 1,000
avec des
kilometers
frontières.
that
Et
go
donc, quand nous
through
disons
5
frontières, c'est des
countries
institutions
with
qui
borders,
sont
and
derrière.
therefore there are
Et ce qu'il faut aussi
institutions
comprendre,
that
c'est
support
que
these borders.
cet espace
And what you have to
fait
understand is
75% de
that
l'activité
the
économique
space represents
de
75%
la sous-région
of the
ouest africaine.
economic activity
Ce
of
qu'il faut
the
aussi
West
comprendre, pour la
African
portion du Bénin,
sub-region.
nous avons
And for Benin,
135
we
km
have
sur les 1000
135
km. Mais
kilometers
ces
out of
135
these
km
1,000
traversent
kilometers. And
un
these
espace
135
et
kilometers
l'impact direct
go
de cet
through
espace, c'est
space,
30% de la
and
population
that
de mon pays
represents an impact on 30%
sur
of the
seulement 2%
population
du
of my
territoire.
country, on
Ça veut dire quoi?
2%
Nous
of the
avons un espace qui
territory.
est
What
sous
does that
contrainte.
mean? We have a
Et cet
space
espace,
that has
sa contrainte, c'est
limitations,
aussi
and the
qu'il se déploie le long du littoral.
is that
Et
this
donc, il est
space is
menacé
along
par
the
l'avancée de la mer.
coast,
Et
and
nous
so
avons des
it's
moyennes de
threatened
15 à 20
by
mètres
the sea.
d'avancée
We
annuelle
have
qui font que cet espace
15,
aujourd'hui est
20
très vulnérable.
meters
En même temps, il
where
est
the sea
coincé
advances
entre la mer et
every
les
year,
lagunes
and so it's
et
a
donc il est
threat.
sujet à
And then
des
the road is
inondations.
between the sea
Donc,
and the
nous ne pouvons
laguna,
pas voir
so
seulement
it
un
can be
corridor comme
flooded.
une qui passe,
So we can't
mais il
only
faut
see the
regarder toute cette
corridor as a
dynamique
road. You
pour
have to
pouvoir
see the
comprendre
whole
pourquoi il est tellement important de
area
travailler
and
à fond
see
sur cet espace si
why
l'on
it's
veut
important to
impulser le
work on
développement de
the
toute la région
space
Afrique de
if you
l'Ouest.
want to
Parce que
develop
quand on dit
all of West
75% de
Africa,
l'activité
because when
économique,
we say
je pense que c'est
75% of
important.
economic
Et donc,
activity, this
je
is
pense
very
que
important.
certaines
And so
institutions
I feel that
ont
some
compris, et telles
institutions
que la
have
Banque mondiale,
understood
telles que
this,
la Banque
like the
africaine de
World
développement. Et
Bank,
depuis
the
quelques
African
années,
Development Bank,
il y
and
a eu
in
des projets
recent
qui ont été
years,
implémentés
we've had
pour justement
projects
permettre à ce que
implemented so
nous
that
puissions
we
rehausser
could
le niveau,
enhance
n'est-ce pas, de ce corridor.
or the
Et donc, il
raise
y a
the
deux
level of
projets
the
que je
corridor.
voudrais
So
très
there
rapidement
are two
évoquer.
projects I want to
Le
talk to you
projet
very quickly.
facilité, donc
There's
facilitation du commerce
a
et du
project
transport de la
to
Banque mondiale que vous
facilitate
connaissez très bien. Et
transportation
puis,
and
le
trade
projet de la Banque
of the
africaine
World
de
Bank. And
développement
then
qui
there's
a
a
permis de
project of
réaliser une
the
bonne
African
partie de
Development
l'infrastructure
Bank
routière
in
qui
order
relie Cotonou à
to
Lomé. Cotonou, c'est une
construct part
capitale.
of the infrastructure
Lomé, c'est
between
l'autre. Parce
Lomé
que
and
les 5 pays
Cotonou.
traversés,
Because
ça
the
fait 5
five,
ports. Et ces 5 ports
countries
permettent de
are-
desservir la
that the
plupart des
corridor
pays qui
goes
sont
through
à
represent
l'intérieur, tels que le
5
Burkina
ports.
Faso, le
And
Niger.
so
Donc,
those
c'est
5
une
ports
relation en réalité
also
sur
help
cet espace.
the
Et il
countries
faut
which
le
are
comprendre comme ça pour
landlocked,
voir
like Burkina
l'enjeu qui
Faso.
nous amène
So
à nous
you have to
intéresser
look at all of
à
that
cet
to see
espace. Et
what
donc,
the
ces
stakes
projets
are in
ont
this
permis
space.
d'améliorer
And so these
la qualité de
projects
la route.
made it
Il y a
possible to
20 ans,
improve the
la
quality
plupart
of
du
the
réseau
roads.
routier était
20
une seule
years
voie.
ago, the
Et donc,
road
il y avait beaucoup
had a
d'accidents,
single
la voie
lane.
était en
So
mauvais
you
état.
had a lot
Mais
of
progressivement,
accidents. It
avec
was
ces
in
projets,
poor
nous avons
repair, this
amélioré
road. But
considérablement
with
l'état.
these projects,
Et une bonne partie aujourd'hui est en voie 2 x
improved the
2.
road, and
Alors, donc, ça a
sometimes
réduit
part of the road has
considérablement
two
le
lanes,
délai.
or
Et
two
les
times
études qui
two
ont été
lanes,
faites
and that's
en
reduced
2017 ont montré
the
quoi? Ont
time for
montré que
transportation. And the studies in
pour un camion
2017
qui fait
showed
affaire
that for a
en
truck
traversant le corridor,
that goes
il gagne
through this corridor, the
50%
truck
de temps. Donc,
saves
avant, il était à 4 heures de
50% in
route.
time.
Aujourd'hui, il est à 2 heures de route.
Before he had
Donc, ça
4
veut dire que
hours
nous avons
of
réduit de
driving,
moitié
now he only has
les
2
délais.
hours of driving. So
Et
we've
il y a
reduced
également
the
des impacts
transportation
par rapport au
time
projet
by half.
facilité
And this has
sur les
also
délais de
had an
transit dans les
impact
postes frontaliers.
on
Alors,
the
au début du
transit
projet,
time
on avait
in
des délais qui
the
allaient jusqu'à
border
24 heures.
areas.
Et nous
Before
sommes
these
passés
projects, we had
vers la fin en
delays of
2017
24
à
hours.
5 heures.
And
Ça veut
then
dire quoi?
now
Nous
we've
avons
gone
gagné
to
vraiment.
4 or
Or,
5 hours to cross
le
the
temps
border.
est un
So
facteur
that's been a
important
huge
dans
savings.
le coût du transport
And
dans nos
time
pays.
is important when
Donc,
it
je
comes
tiens
to
à
the
souligner
cost
ces
of
éléments qui sont des gains
transportation in our
aujourd'hui.
country.
Et
So
même
I
sur
wanted
les
to
accidents,
mention
il
those
y a eu un
elements.
regret.
And when it comes
Donc,
to
le niveau
accidents,
d'accident a
there's
baissé
been
parce
a
que
reduction
nous
in
étions
road
en
accidents.
train,
Because,
il y a 2 ans, on était
2
encore
years
dans
ago, we
166
still
accidents
had
par an. Et nous
166
sommes passés à
accidents
150,
per
donc il y a eu
year.
10%.
And now we
Et quand nous
have
disons
only
accident, il faut
150.
comprendre,
So you've had a
dans notre contexte, les
10%
accidents,
reduction.
c'est
In
très
our,
souvent
and I
des
must
blessés
say
graves
that
ou
in our
des
context,
décès.
the
Sur les
accidents
150, il y a eu 40 décès.
very
Et les
often
blessés
lead
graves,
to
dans quel état sont-ils? Pour la
deaths,
simple raison que
for
le
the
mode de transport
reason that
est encore influencé beaucoup plus par les transports à 2 roues. Donc les motos, parce que ça va plus vite, ça permet d'éviter les congestions. Et il y a également les taxis-motos. Donc dans l'agglomération traversée par le projet, par le corridor, nous avons 200 000 motos qui s'exercent à faire donc l'activité de taxi avec l'effet sur l'environnement, donc la pollution
there's a lot of
et donc les
motorcycles that
accidents. Donc
serve
c'est des
as
chiffres qui nous permettent de
taxis.
voir que
So
nous sommes
there
sur
you
un
could have
territoire
had
d'enjeu
a
et
lot
que
of
ce corridor
accidents. So you
mérite
see the
qu'on regarde de
stakes,
près ce qui s'y
and
passe.
we
Pour ce
have
qui
to look
concerne la portion
closely at
béninoise,
this
voilà les projets qui ont été
corridor. So when it
implémentés et
comes to
voilà des résultats qu'on a
Beninese
pu
part,
toucher. Et
those are
l'autre chose
the
importante,
projects, and those are
c'est
the
que cette voie
impacts.
traverse
Another
les principales
important thing
agglomérations.
is that this
Et aujourd'hui,
corridor goes
il y a
through
une
major
fluidité que
cities,
ça a
and you
apporté, mais
have
surtout un
today
développement des affaires
much more
le long
fluid
de la route. Parce que
transportation,
le
and
foncier a
also
pris de la valeur une fois
along
que la
the
route est passée.
road,
Et donc, il y a des espaces qui ont doublé, triplé de valeur en termes fonciers. Et donc, tout le monde veut aller au contact de la route pour exposer son affaire. Et ça, c'est les bénéfices de la voie. Mais après, il y a également des effets négatifs. Et je crois que l'un des problèmes que nous avons aujourd'hui, comme nous n'avons pas un réseau intérieur dans les villes très dense en termes de voies praticables, tout le monde se rue sur ces voies. Je suis moi-même un produit de ces voies. Je l'emprunte tous les matins pour aller au bureau, mais il me permet d'aller plus vite aujourd'hui au bureau. Après, nous nous retrouvons tous et à des heures de pointe, vous pouvez finalement faire par endroit 2 heures de temps juste pour traverser quelques kilomètres. Donc voilà un peu toute la problématique et voilà des efforts qui ont été faits pour améliorer. Je voudrais partager ces éléments avec vous. Merci.
These are the projects and the improvements we've made. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Solomon. All right, now let's move to Maria, and let's hear about the 10T corridors. I mean, in particular, the European Union has been one of, I guess, when we talk about the corridor development and how these have impacted cities and the EU policies, these are definitely one of the more advanced models that we can all learn from. So, Maria, please.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to be here. Much appreciated. It's an honor. I'll speak about very briefly about the Trans-European networks to give a little bit of background, and then I'll emphasize on a corridor that is of particular interest to my country, Greece. The Trans-European Transport Networks, or TEN-Ts, as we call them, comprise road, rail, water, and air infrastructure, plus logistics and intelligent transport systems. And the goal of putting together TEN-Ts was to provide intermodal, interconnected, and interoperable infrastructure that would be actively managed and provide connectivity among ports, cities, and regions all over Europe through long-distance and high-speed routes. The first action plans were adopted by the European Commission in 1990. Today, big part of the infrastructure is in place. And the projects are mostly funded through national and state governments, but we also have other sources of funding, which include European community funds like ERDF, cohesion funds, and the TEN-T specific budget. Other sources are loans from international financial institutions like the European Investment Bank and private funding. TEN-T is being developed in a dual-layer approach. We have the comprehensive layer and we have the core layer. And the comprehensive network is the basic underlying layer that includes the overall strategy. The core network overlays the comprehensive network and comprises the elements of the system that are of highest importance, the ones that are considered to be of the highest added value to the European Union. The core network is expected to be completed by 2030, while the comprehensive network is anticipated to be completed by 2050. Investment requirements between 2016 and 2030 to realize the core network are anticipated to amount to about 750 billion euro. Now, if we include the comprehensive network and other transport investment, this amount goes up to 1.5 trillion euros, so it's a major investment. Within this system, there are 10 priority corridors. The one that I'd like to emphasize a bit on is Corridor 4. It's the Orient East Med Corridor. It is, in a sense, a long corridor that runs north to south east. and connects areas in Central Europe with maritime interfaces in the North and Baltic Sea, Black Sea, and the Mediterranean. The ports that are connected through Corridor 4 are anticipated to evolve as major multimodal logistics centers, and they will connect also with the major activity centers in Central Europe. One of the projects that is highlighted along this corridor is the rail connection, the high-speed rail connection between Athens and Thessaloniki, which is planned to be finished soon. Within this context, I would like to note on a recent major project in Greece, which is the privatization of the port of Thessaloniki. The process of privatization is about to finish within this month. It involves a consortium of 3 companies that last April were announced as the highest bidder for the 60% stake of Thessaloniki Port Authority. The bid was 232 approximately million euro for the concession deal through to 2051. This investment, there is an analysis of the economic impact of this investment, which indicates that it will contribute about 1.6 billion euro to the country's GDP in the next decade. About 290 to 380 million euro will be directed into employee salaries, and 270 to 600 million will go to state coffers. It is very important one for the country. It is considered that the catchment area of the port for the whole project, including both the direct area and also the extended one, is about 41 million people. And the project will increase employment, it will improve connectivity, and so on in the region. I'd like to come back later and talk a little bit about the connection between this project and the corridor and how the infrastructure can be leveraged between the two. But I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks very much. We'll take a break from the big investments and corridor project, and now we're going to go to Chaibo, who actually, it would be very useful for our audience here to get a sense of what Trucking Alliance is. Many do know it, many do not know it. But to understand what the mission of Trucking Alliance is, and to get a sense again of how it is helping increase efficiency, if not revolutionize the efficiency of the freight industry in China.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I define the Truck Alliance business, I'd like to give us a little bit brief introduction about the trucking industry in China. It is about $750 billion a year. In US, the trucking industry is about $700 billion a year. So both markets is about the same size. However, the trucking industry in China is highly fragmented. There's around 800,000 registered trucking companies. 85% of trucking company only has 1 or 2 trucks. The largest 10 company only take 2% of the market share. So nationwide, averagely, every trucking company only has 1.3 truck. Therefore, the efficiency is very efficient. The truck remains empty 40% all the time in China. And every truck daily travel distance is only 300 kilometers. So it's a little bit more than 200 miles. And every truck driver need to wait 3 days to get next order, to wait for the goods. So under such kind of context, the Truck Alliance is a company to provide O2O logistic information platform, so that to provide the freight information to the truck drivers for them to find the goods. Each day, they provided about 5 million pieces of the freight information to his 4.5 million registered truck drivers. So by doing this way, the truck driver doesn't have to go to the logistic center where they usually go and spend 3 days to find the goods for the next transport. Instead, they just open the app on their cell phone and find goods for the next order. This is the core business. But every service to the truck driver and the shipper are free. And this company already become a unicorn company because they have different business mode. They didn't charge the truck driver and the shipper a penny. But when the truck driver uses the app to find the goods, they also use the app for the gas, for the mortgage, for the insurance, for the lodging, and for all kinds of things. By doing this way, the truck alliance charge other company for the money. So in China, they call it big data euro. It's an industry ecosystem. Every big company doing this kind of thing now. That's my brief introduction.
Thank you very much, Xiaobo. So now we're going back to corridors. This is actually, very interesting. One of the things I was thinking about, whether you've had a chance to consider the impacts or to assess the impacts in terms of reduced congestion because of the service you're offering, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, because this is, again, efficiency gets into all these areas, but this is clearly one of the areas where you can see the benefit going across all the different principles and goals that we're talking about. We'll get back to that later. Johnny, now the public-private partnerships and the Walvis Bay group that you're chairing, several corridors, 3 main corridors that you're going through. You're also the chair of the Africa Corridor Management Alliance. How do these corridors benefit cities? They bring, yes, all the corridors, once they're improved, they bring reduction in transport costs, they bring reduction in time. But what can we say directly about benefits that cities are getting from, or the hinterland of the corridor is getting from the improvements, and what negative impacts?
Yeah, thank you for that. Maybe just to start off and use Walvis Bay in Namibia as an example, and a bit of just intro in terms of where Namibia is and sort of the country, because I'm sure there's a lot of people here that don't even know about the country of Namibia.
But Johnny, there is one gentleman sitting right there from Namibia.
Yes, I know, but our country, only one. Namibia, even if you look back at our history, we almost 28 years old in terms of a country being independent. At this time, we have a population of only about 2.3 million people. Our country size is more than 800,000 square kilometers. We also have a desert. So when we became independent, at that time we were managed by South Africa. Before that, we were a German colony, and then before that, a British colony. So there was a certain level of infrastructure development, but of course, at that time, in terms of trade, we were only linked to South Africa and none of the other neighbors. So we said, what should we do now? Because all our imports trade is either with or through South Africa. And we can only create value if we become more independent in terms of our economy. We have quite a few countries as neighbors to us. So how do we now connect ourselves, etc., to these countries? We have, in terms of Southern Africa, more than 300 million people. So we can only advance our economy really if we can benefit out of that 300 million and forget to look at just the 2 million that we are. So that's then the focus that we had. And I always call this our sort of 10-point succession plan. So the first thing is we took on a vision that we want to connect ourselves through transportation. There was a complete commitment from government. Of course, many priorities in terms of the government at that time, but we said, let's connect ourselves to the neighboring countries. let's do a lot of infrastructure development. And at the moment, we are actually investing in our port about $300 million for the neighboring countries and not for Namibia, because we already supply in that need. So we have to take that lead in terms of the development. And I'll come back later to the city of Walvis Bay, which is the main port. We then established a PPP forum, and we said there must be a single body that goes out to promote and advance Namibia as an alternative route. We set up a lot of cross-border partnerships to improve efficiency. After the infrastructure development, we focused on implementing, getting capacity from the neighboring countries. You can just imagine, even at this stage of our transportation development in Namibia, we don't have a single large logistics company, and Namibian-owned. So we are very dependent on global firms to attract them as investors into the country, to the extent that we eventually developed ourselves as an alternative trade route for 7 countries beyond Namibia. We have moved volumes within the past 15 years from a zero base to about 500,000 tons that we are serving the neighboring countries. And about 5 years ago, we said, we've achieved this now, so let's take it to the next level of developing Namibia into a logistics hub for Southern Africa, and bearing in mind that we have a big brother next door that we always have to look at in terms of how our efficiencies should be better. And then, of course, now we can also then start looking at other sectors for development along the corridors and not just transportation alone. Now, coming back to Walvis Bay as the main connection point, there's been a significant development. Of course, the number of people in Namibia, as I said, is only about 2.3 million, but Walvis Bay as a port was basically just a fishing village when we started off. For the past 10 years, the population has doubled, and we expect that within the next 5 years, it will also double up again. There's also a lot of other industries that has developed in the meantime, even for oil and gas. Although we don't have oil or gas within Namibia or at our coastline at the moment, we have developed that service to service the whole coast of West Africa because we saw an opportunity. So that's really one thing that is quite unique. Then just another example in terms of a city is just the city which is connecting at the border to Angola. About 10 years after our corridor development, this city has grown then also significantly to the extent when we started off to serve southern Angola, we had a lot of challenges with the border transit time. But the opportunity was there to use that as a transit point into Southern Africa. And we said, how are we going to do it? We can take it from Walvis Bay up to the border within 12 hours, but then it's stuck there for weeks. So what we then did is we created a free trade zone at the border post. And with this free trade zone, the transporters and the traders within Angola then came to pick up the goods at the border. And this has really created a lot of benefit for that border town within Namibia. So let me stop there for now.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. And again, I mean, I was thinking in terms of what to do to leverage this corridor, and the free trade zone is actually one area of looking at it. One of the points that typically is mentioned when you have a corridor and there's less stoppage at the border because things are moving seamlessly, that people at that border tend to lose. And that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. But my next set of questions that we are going to go through, and I'm going to kind of push a bit on that because that's the harder one. The development of the infrastructure, the development of the corridors, the development of large projects, it has its challenges, but it's something that we're doing. Now, I want to ask in terms of the project in Argentina, for example, you're something this is under planning, it's going to be implemented soon. But in addition to the large investment in the railways, what is the government thinking of in order to make the most of that investment? Are there other complementary policies that can even get a higher benefit from the investment of the infrastructure? Are there negative impacts that need to be mitigated? The same thing when it comes to the corridors. I mean, you heard, for example, I mean, when Indermit started by hitting us with this land markets. When land markets don't work, we're going to have a serious problem. Well, are there issues? This is a big issue, but are there, other than that high-level, institution level, are there interventions that can be made or have been made to increase the value of the investment in the corridors?
Thank you. Yes, of course, we have to think this as part of a broader policy related with public transportation, and as I was telling you, how to make people to move in a better way in our metropolitan area. And maybe a very important thing is that we are working with demand management. We have to look the way for people to leave their private cars and move to public transportation. And although we are doing a lot in our bus system that is very important, we think that the train will have a very important role in the future on moving people from the car to the public transportation. But we are also working right now, we launched this a week ago with integration fare, so that people start choosing the best way to move from one place to another one, not only thinking in the money they spend, because that we are giving some discounts, 50% in the second trip and 75% discount in the third and fourth trip. And that will encourage people to change their mode of moving. Maybe today they're only taking one bus, and they will probably start taking or two buses or a bus and the train. And so our main goal to have a better railway system is to make people to see that we are looking forward for them to have a better transportation system. And what we are also working a lot is with the municipalities. As I was telling you, we have this big Buenos Aires city, but we have 40 municipalities, that is more than 12 million people, and not all of them come to the city. 3 million people come to the city every day, but the others move between municipalities, and we are already working with them in a TOD model where we are framing with them what can we do in all the areas around the train stations. We have more than 300 stations in this metropolitan area, to make them change their zoning code and to make them more dense, so that people live around the station, but also there are attractions to go to those stations to work or to study. And that is something that we started in this period of our government 2 years ago with all these municipalities, to change the mode they relate with the train stations. And instead of thinking that what they have to do around the train stations is commercial developments only or other things, to think in a way where mixed use are involved, so that we can attract trips in both sides. People going to those places, but also people being able to go from those places to somewhere else.
Merci. Pour ce qui concerne le Bénin, le gouvernement a pris la mesure des choses et est en train de développer des politiques complémentaires. Parce que, en réalité, la vocation du corridor, c'est d'être un couloir de transit. C'est des voies de transit. Mais aujourd'hui, comme nous n'avons pas un réseau intérieur dans les villes très développées, ces voies deviennent pratiquement des voies urbaines pour les traversées de la ville. Et c'est ça qui explique le nombre d'accidents, etc. Donc, qu'est-ce que le gouvernement est en train de vouloir faire aujourd'hui? Le gouvernement veut investir massivement dans les voies urbaines. pour qu'on puisse décongestionner les voies de transit. Et donc, il y a un programme de bitumage dans les principales agglomérations du pays qui est lancé. C'est un programme très ambitieux qu'on n'a jamais monté à ce niveau, qui fait plus de 1200 millions de dollars, et donc qui va permettre de densifier le réseau de voies. Et si ce réseau est densifié, nous allons corriger aussi la modalité du transport, parce que nous n'avons pas développé suffisamment le transport en commun, parce que justement, les voies ne permettent pas d'accéder à toutes les rues. Or, avec les motos, les gens sont plus facilement à même d'aller partout. Et donc, nous allons pouvoir instaurer avec ce projet un transport commun plus cohérent, et ce qui va donner finalement une visibilité. Le deuxième projet dont je vais parler, c'est le projet de marché. En réalité, tous les gens qui traversent ces frontières, qui vont d'un pays à l'autre, vont faire affaire. Et parmi ces gens, il y a une grande proportion de femmes. Et ces femmes, c'est le marché qui est leur interface d'affaires. Et donc, le gouvernement veut investir sur les marchés pour permettre donc à ces femmes d'accéder plus facilement à des espaces cohérents pour mieux faire affaire. Et donc, il y a un plan d'investissement dans les principaux marchés qui sont le long du corridor et d'autres marchés du pays qui est en cours et qui va se dérouler donc dans le mandat qui est en cours. Un troisième projet du gouvernement, c'est le projet de protection de la côte. J'ai dit tout à l'heure que le corridor est menacé. À quoi ça sert si on investit tous ces milliards et que la mer avancée emporte le corridor? Parce qu'il y a des endroits aujourd'hui qui sont à quelques centaines seulement de la mer. Et donc, le gouvernement a également investi. Il y a la phase 2 du projet qui fait plus de 60 millions de dollars, qui a démarré il y a quelques mois et qui permet de sécuriser donc cette bande de 125 km que prend la côte. Et le dernier projet dont je vais parler, c'est une incitation que le gouvernement veut faire par rapport aux collectivités. Et parce que si nous lisons bien le rapport du 2009 dont le professeur a parlé tout à l'heure, le rapport insiste sur les échelles. Les échelles n'ont pas les mêmes préoccupations. Le gouvernement impulse le corridor parce que le gouvernement a des questions de connectivité avec d'autres pays à régler. Mais les collectivités qui sont traversées ont des préoccupations. C'est-à-dire, la voie qui passe, comment est-ce qu'elle m'apporte de la richesse? Comment est-ce que j'en profite? Aujourd'hui, il n'y a aucun mécanisme qui permette aux collectivités de profiter réellement, de doper leur économie avec les voies qui passent. Donc, nous sommes en train de travailler avec les collectivités pour que les potentialités qu'elles ont puissent structurer des points de compétitivité. Ça veut dire quoi? Quand vous traversez une localité, vous rencontrez un point de compétitivité qui n'est pas forcément en milieu urbain, mais qui est un espace où vous découvrez quoi? Lorsque vous êtes un voyageur, vous pouvez vous arrêter. Vous avez un point d'accès Internet parce que nous sommes à l'ère du numérique. Ça permet de faire un aménagement numérique du territoire. Donc, vous pouvez vous arrêter, avoir le Wi-Fi, vous connecter et peut-être faire affaire. Vous avez des services financiers qui sont là. Vous avez la sécurité qui est là. Vous avez des aires de restaurants, de détente. Vos enfants, pendant ce temps, peuvent être en train de s'amuser. Et vous avez également tout ce qu'il y a comme exposition du territoire. Donc vous ne traversez pas sans connaître quelle est la localité que vous êtes en train de traverser. Et vous pouvez faire affaire. Nous avons des territoires, par exemple, qui ont des produits intéressants, des fruits, et ils peuvent vous faire goûter. Vous pouvez goûter, dire, mais je reviendrai faire affaire parce que ça, c'est un territoire ananas, ça, c'est un territoire de l'orange. Et donc, cette réflexion, nous l'avons partagée avec toutes les collectivités du pays. Et aujourd'hui, elles sont acquises. Il y a des collectivités qui nous ont saisis pour dire de les accompagner déjà en 2018 pour que nous puissions formuler le projet et avancer. Et je pense que c'est un projet qui va prendre et permettre aux collectivités de profiter donc de la voie qui passe. En ce moment, ce n'est plus la voie qui passe de façon muette, mais c'est la voie qui s'exprime, le territoire qui en profite. Donc voilà un peu ce que nous sommes en train de faire par rapport aux initiatives complémentaires au niveau du gouvernement et avec les collectivités locales. Merci.
Thank you very much, Solomon. I think a mix of positive interventions in terms of dealing with the markets, in terms of creating new opportunities, also addressing negative through coastal management, rich example along that corridor. In fact, I know also that there were very successful programs for dealing with HIV/AIDS along this corridor as well. Maria, over to you, please.
You asked a very difficult question of me, Baher. What is the government thinking?
That's why we have this distinguished audience here to answer these difficult questions.
I'll try. So I go back a little bit to where I was left earlier with the interconnectivity between this trans-European network and the local and regional investment. And I would like to mention that what made the investment to the port of Thessaloniki attractive, part of it was the existence or the building of Corridor 4 and the opportunities that it provided. And this became part of the strategy of the port. I understand that the new owners have a threefold strategy. At the first tier, they have the port-bound strategy, focusing within the port and the development that needs to take place. The second one is the beyond the port strategy, and this is the important one in relation with the corridors. And the third is the management strategy. If we look into their beyond the port strategy, again, they have like three main priority axes, I would say. The first one is to develop a logistics center adjacent to the container terminal. The second one is to develop or work with rail operators, rail freight operators. And the third one is to develop or operate dry ports in Bulgaria, Fyrom, and Serbia. So obviously there we have the synergies between the two major projects. I would also like to mention that the direct railway connection between the main container pier in the port of Thessaloniki and the national network has been included in the projects to be funded through the TEN-T corridor plan. So, and that is in terms of physical connectivity and relevant interventions. What the government can do or should do or is doing in terms of policies. What seems to be important here is that a long-term strategy exists, and all these projects are nicely planned and they have a clear and stable prioritization within this long-term strategy. It is important to have consensus building among relevant stakeholders, and special attention needs to be placed during the project preparation phase, so everything then can go on smoothly. It doesn't hurt to have, let's say, technical advice from a European perspective and exchange of good practices, because that always helps in building more mature project timelines. And I'm saying all this for a reason. I have the successful example with the Port of Thessaloniki, and I have the not so successful example of implementing actually TEN-T projects in my country. A second point that I would like to make, in addition to the policies, is the regulatory framework that needs to be in place. And this is probably the most significant ones. We need to simplify the public procurement processes and the procedures. So we need to have simple and short procedures. We need to stimulate competition. We need to maximize transparency and promote dialogue among the stakeholders. At the same time, we need to simplify the permitting procedures. The duration needs to be reduced, deadlines need to be introduced for the permits, because that will reduce the cost and the risk of the projects, and it is very important. Public acceptance is also very important, which means communication, improvement of visibility and acceptability of the investments, and finally, legal certainty. We need to have stable and predictable technical specifications for the projects to happen. And I'm saying that for a reason, because as a research director at the Hellenic Institute of Transport, we undertook a study when the previous funding period was ending and the new one was about to start. We spoke with all different agencies and authorities to see what has been accomplished and what are the next priorities in terms of projects to be implemented within the TEN-T framework program. And what we found out is that to a large extent, the projects that were suggested to be included in the next cycle were carryover projects from the previous one that somehow got delayed or they got overspent for whatever reason, and the reasons very often are permits that contractors are waiting forever, or contractors going bankrupt because of not budgeting the project properly. So that part of planning and the framework that will make it more efficient is very important. To me, it's critically important to be in place.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Marie. Xiaobo, I was thinking when you were talking about the platform, the virtual platforms, there are a lot of virtual platforms that have perished in a very glamorous way. So I'm just thinking in the huge success that Truck Alliance has had. What would you attribute that to? Is it? I know obviously the app and everything else on it is part of it, but when you were approaching it, what were you thinking of the obstacles, and what were you thinking to minimize any potential or possibility of failure?
Well, it's a sensitive topic. From what I introduced before, I believe everyone of you may understand the Truck Alliance is like a Uber Freight, which provides the freight information to the truck driver so they could wait shorter to get the next order or avoid travel empty. That's what they did in the past 2-3 years. But they're doing something different now. They have a bigger plan. Like I introduced before, the trucking industry in China is very fragmented. Every trucking company is actually just a couple. They have 1 or 2 trucks, and a couple drives out. The whole business, the living relies on the local brokerage. The broker tells them whatever. What the broker usually do is they always tell the shipper, the market is short of the truck driver. And they always tell the truck driver there's not enough goods for them to transport. The broker, well, is this public, this content?
Yes.
And I should stop. Right, in that market, the broker is actually manipulate the price, both sides. That's what happened in past 10, 20 years. A lot of gangsters run the broker company. So when the Truck Alliance opened up the new business in different regions.
This is being broadcast in China.
Okay.
Straight to Beijing.
Well, serious? So when the Truck Alliance opened up the new business, new area, they got a lot of resistance. Because, what they're doing is really trying to eliminate the broker company. They connect the shipper with the trucking company, usually a couple, a family. That's what they're doing. And I think I probably should stop here.
Thank you, Xiaobo. It's interesting. This is something that's coming up and up again. You think the brokers or the 3PLs or the 4PLs that this is a competitive industry, and if there's a competitive industry, there's no need for what this company is doing. But I think there's more and more evidence that it's not as competitive an industry as we believe it is, but definitely something worth looking into. Indermit, I'll skip, I'll come back to you, but I'll go now, Johnny, now part 2, complementary policies.
So now I want to just talk from a continental perspective. So we have started an initiative a few years ago, 3-4 years ago, to establish an alliance with all the corridor institutions on the continent of Africa. So we still have a long way to go. And what we told ourselves is that if we look at all the corridors, and there's a lot of commonality with what Solomon has just also noted, is that at this stage, most of the corridors has got a focus of transportation. And as a continent, we need to move into a level of trade and economic development. So with this initiative of the Africa Corridor Management Alliance, which is also, of course, in collaboration with the World Bank through the SSIDP program. We're working together, as well as the United Nations Economic Commission of Africa on this initiative. So we've developed a strategic plan in terms of where we see ourselves within the medium and long term, with a focus of making all the corridors focusing on economic development. If you look at the total number of corridors on the continent, the main corridors is around about 54, so a little bit more than 50. You have only, say, about 10 corridor management institutions. So there's a lot of room in terms of the development. From a continental perspective, there's also, in the 1950s, the African Union already identified about 9 trans-African highways. So the planning is coming a long way. But what we said is, let's focus on economic development and trade. And through this process, let's work together as various corridors so that we can combine the capacities that we have, the resources that we have, and make sure that there is connectivity between the various countries, the various regions, and that at the end of the day, that we start focusing on implementation and improving efficiencies to the extent that we do not want, as I think Solomon also mentioned, that we do not want trucks just to move, or whether it's trucks or trains, to move from one point to another point. We also need to find a way where there's economic benefit in terms of the local economies where it passes. I mean, for Namibia, for instance, our corridors, the 3 corridor linkages that we have, is a distance of about 2,500 kilometers. So it's a long distance. So you need to find a way to add value for the economies in between. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Johnny. I do think actually from your previous answers, you've given a bit of the lessons, but let's, if we go quickly across the board, we want to leave a bit of time for questions. If there's one lesson that we're, as a country is looking to develop its corridors, when thinking about the spatial efficiency, if there's one lesson that we would want to leave with them, something that they're likely to overlook, something important they're likely to overlook, or something that they should be paying attention to, what should that be? One, you know, in one quick lesson, one sentence. I'll start from over there, Johnny.
If I look at the biggest challenge coming from corridor development and also looking at the impact, for me it's very simple. There's a lot of plans, but it's about implementation, and I think this is really what we want to achieve moving forward, that we rather need to see how we can collaborate, because there's such a need in terms of infrastructure development to improve, etc. But if you don't start somewhere, so even if we take one step, even if the step is a very small step, so let's start with, even if I don't say walking, let's start crawling in terms of moving forward and implementing so that we ensure that there's progress in the long term. Thank you.
Thank you. Indermit.
So I can't give you a general answer to such a question because it's, I guess it depends on the country. So let me try to give you a specific answer for China, let's say, right? Where China has actually invested a lot in infrastructure, including these corridors and so on. So what should China do now? So if you look at the efficiency of Chinese growth, you actually find that it's actually been decreasing a lot over time, in the sense that they've been putting much more savings and investment to get less and less growth, right? So if you look at the capital output ratios, they've been rising a lot and that kind of thing. So what's the solution for China? I think that the solution for China is that you have to go back to the 1980s and so on and see what China did then. And what China did was liberalize its product markets. So goods and services, for example, if you look at those markets, you still have inefficiencies in them, but you find that about 95% of goods and services are actually intermediated through markets, through the price mechanism. Right? If you look at Chinese factor markets, the markets for land, labor, and capital, they're mostly still all directed. So if you look, for example, at the labor market, there are lots of restrictions. I mean, it's not that bad as compared to capital markets, which is all directed credit. And if you look at land markets, it's actually a thing. And China is paying that price of spatial inefficiency is paying because it hasn't yet gone to the second generation of reforms. It's very difficult to do this because it, basically because it means that you have to change the system of public finance, you have to change the system, especially about intergovernmental finance and so on. But if China manages to do that, it'll get another 25 years of growth and it'll end up being a high-income country.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. Okay, Xiaobo, in terms, again, freight efficiency, what's your vision? What's next?
This is the one that's connected to Beijing.
I was staying in this country. The emergency of electric car and automatic car, truck, will significantly reduce the labor cost, the energy consumption, and the environmental cost. That's one factor, major factor impacting the efficiency. Another efficiency is about the data. China is proposing a new business model. They call it, Internet plus economy, which allows you, for example, the supply chain is a long chain. So the trucking, along with some other transportation mode, should be seamlessly built into the whole life cycle of freight, from the production to consumption. This way, the demand can be better predicted or planned for. This way, the whole system's efficiency could be improved. That's those two factors I can think about.
Thank you. Mary.
I'll go back to what Johnny said earlier. And he said, get it started. It doesn't matter at any pace, but get it started. I'd like to add to that and say, keep it going. So remove more hurdles from the way and put together the environment, the regulatory environment that will make the project happen. No delays, no overspending. Just keep it going.
Thank you, Marie. Solomon.
Okay. Merci. Je crois qu'au regard de tout ce qu'on a dit, ce qu'on a expérimenté jusque-là, on a eu des résultats et il y a de l'efficacité. Et je pense qu'on pourrait améliorer. Et pour moi, améliorer revient à repenser la géographie économique, c'est-à-dire mettre le corridor au service du territoire. Ne pas voir le corridor comme la main, mais penser à tout le territoire pour que justement nous puissions jouer sur tous les leviers et optimiser l'efficacité dont nous sommes en train de parler.
Thank you. Manuela?
Well, in this case, in the public transportation view, I think that the most important thing is to continue making people choose public transportation and use all the technology that we have that will probably continue coming in the next years to make that happen and to make people to choose the best way to move from one way to another one. And also, of course, to work together with all the institutions that have to be part of this discussion, not only the public sector, but also the private sector. That is very important.
Thank you very much, Manuela. So now we have a few minutes left if there are a couple of questions. Anka, please introduce yourself. They'll do it over.
Don't do anything. Is it okay now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. My name is Anca Dumitrescu. I work with Africa Transport, and I couldn't resist saying something because first, I'm the mother of the Abidjan-Lagos corridor, in the sense that I've worked in West Africa with the 5 member countries, and we developed the design together, and I worked on it for 6 years. So, and there were many things that we achieved, and connectivity is one of them. But I think that the key word of your session is efficiency. And one of the lessons learned, big lessons learned, is that maybe we didn't get too much efficiency. When you you look at the corridor, for example, the one that comes from a port and goes to a hinterland or anything else, you look at port efficiency, and there was somebody, the gentleman from Walvis Corridor, saying that, oh, we invest a lot in ports, and that's true. Port efficiency is very important. Border crossing, very important. Roads are very important. However, what the big lesson learned for us is that there was connectivity, but not too much efficiency. And I want to hear from any of you whether you have any ideas on how to improve or how to make more efficient the connectivity between the port and the hinterland. And most of the cities in African cities are city ports, and they are gateways, they are transit countries. So what we found out in our analytical work is that most of the transit time from the gateway to the hinterland, not most of it, you have 1/3 maybe of the transit time is to get out of the port and out of the city, port city. So I'm talking about the comfort of the population in the city, but I'm also talking about the efficiency of transport and of trucks. So how to make this better and how to improve this port city and port hinterland connectivity so that to become more efficient. Thank you.
Thank you, Anka. We'll take another question.
Yes, John Wetmore with pedestrians.org. You put the corridors through various towns and villages. We talked a little bit about the economic opportunity that might bring, but you're also going to have an impact on the village in other ways. For example, do you see an increase in pedestrian fatalities because it's more difficult to cross a busy road? How has that been addressed? What has been the impact there?
Okay, who would like to please? Just say whether you're addressing the first or the second.
Yeah, the first question on efficiency in terms of the corridor. So when we started off with our initiative in terms of Walvis Bay with a complete corridor, it was always about dealing with the neighboring country and the border posts. So when we started off, we first had to make sure that we create also a PPP across the border between the private and public sector, but that we have common objectives. Namibia had an objective, and the neighboring country also had an objective, but not the same. So we had to create common objectives. That is what we focused on. And we managed to reduce the transit time because we eventually agreed with the same understanding, to the extent that the alternative that we provided reduced the transit time and efficiency as an alternative with, in some instances, with more than 14 days. So sometimes you try to see if you can have the same objective, but it's not the same.
Thank you. First or second? First question.
First.
And then Solomon will go to you for the second one.
On the first question regarding the efficiency and the connectivity between port and the city interface, I agree that coordination is needed. And speaking from a transportation modeler's point of view now, I'd like to use as an example the case in the metropolitan New York area going in and out of the port. We had trackers saying that they're waiting for 2 and 3 hours to get in and then out of the port. And when you speak to the port, the terminal, they say our turnaround time is 20 minutes. You speak with the Department of Transportation, and they say, well, we improved highways. So where is the problem? We need a systemic approach. We need to look at it and identify bottlenecks, because after all, the system is as efficient as the weakest link is. So we need to find where the weak link is and address that.
Thank you, Marie. Solomon?
Merci, mais franchement, je ne résiste pas à la tentation d'aborder la première question parce que nous connaissons un peu.
Puisque vous avez
je voulais dire qu'il y a un aspect important qui malheureusement me renvoie encore à ce qu'on a dit, repenser la géographie économique. Nous, aujourd'hui, pour notre cas, le Bénin, le port, pourquoi les camions traînent avant de rentrer? Je ne parle pas des réformes pour diminuer le jour de transit, ça, des choses sont en train d'être faites. Mais ça traîne pourquoi? Parce que nous avons un port qui se retrouve aujourd'hui en pleine ville. Et donc, la congestion est le lot quotidien. Le quartier qui est le port aujourd'hui se retrouve pratiquement presque dans la zone administrative. Et donc, les camions n'ont pas un accès facile. C'est si simple. Nous n'avons pas projeté très loin. Et c'est pour ça que nous sommes en train vraiment de dire, nous repensons vraiment notre géographie économique pour nous projeter dans le long terme et utiliser l'espace de façon convenable. Et par rapport à la question des accidents, pour ce qui nous concerne, la plupart du cas des accidents que nous avons, c'est surtout entre les véhicules légers et les motos. Les engins à deux roues. Donc ça veut dire quoi? Ça veut dire que nous devons travailler, comme je l'ai dit, à transformer la modalité du transport sur les principaux axes pour réduire. Et la politique dont j'ai parlé tout à l'heure du gouvernement, c'est de rétablir les voies urbaines, de décongestionner donc les voies de transit, de sorte que nous n'ayons pas des motos qui se retrouvent tout le temps en conflit d'utilisation de la route avec les véhicules et les camions. Donc ça, c'est pour le cas du Bénin que je connais bien. Voilà ce que je voudrais dire.
Thank you very much. I do want to thank all of you for your participation, and I want to thank you. We started about 7 minutes late, but we're only finishing 3 minutes over, so we're giving 4 minutes back. Thank you all very much.